Application Security Weekly delivers interviews and news from the worlds of AppSec, DevOps, and all the other ways people find and fix software flaws. Join us as we explore how the latest news highlights modern security practices or reminds us of the missing ones. We also bring insights from interviews on topics from training to threat modeling, from open source tools to cloud-native techniques, plus an occasional reference from new wave to synthwave. Find us at securityweekly.com/subscribe or look for Application Security Weekly wherever you pick your podcasts.
Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. As a member of the Security Weekly community, they are pleased to offer you 50% off your AIDC 2023 tickets using code CRA50OFF. Join us, or they, or them, on October 4th, 2023 in Pentagon City. ICIT, the nation's #1 cybersecurity think tank, brings together America's leading minds to discuss AI's impact on the country. Register at securityweekly.com, AIDC 2023. I also have no idea what that is. So if you go, let us know how that is. So with me now on this segment, Mr. Larry Pesce joining us remotely. Larry, welcome.
Hey. We'll see how bad my video lags, but yeah, I'm coming to you from a lovely something hotel in the greater DC area for some SANS training.
Very nice. Glad you could make it. Mr. Lee Neely is also here with us remotely. Lee, welcome.
Hey, I'm glad to be back. I'm trying a different camera this week just because I was having some challenges with the other one last week, so fingers crossed it behaves.
Hey, it looks good. Looking good. Looking good. Make sure you subscribe to Below the Surface. A new episode should be dropping like tonight, tomorrow morning, with Nate Warfield talking about network device security and its usage by ransomware actors, in addition to some things that Nate has done to persist reboots and updates and upgrades, and how attackers may persist on those devices. So I believe that is Below Surface episode number 13. Which was a lot of fun. You can find out more at eclipsium.com/podcast. On to the security news for this week. Larry, did you want to talk about, there was a couple of stories I sent you and I'm like, ooh, we have to talk about those. And then a week went by and now I don't remember what those were. If there was anything burning on your mind from those stories. I sent you a lot, I feel like.
Yeah, no, I only ended up getting a chance to read one of them. And I think that was the one that you sent to me just the other day. It has literally been a crazy 2 weeks.
Oh, I bet.
So yeah, I taught this week. I'm teaching this week on site in person. I taught last week 3 days remotely. And then it was absolutely nutty from Monday onwards at home last week. So I haven't had a lot of time to look at news stories.
Have you looked at Wi-Fi 7? The next big leap, or a whole lot of nothing?
I did not look at it, but given that that like the article is already like a whole bunch of stuff, whole lot of nothing. Yeah. I'm sort of inclined to go with the whole lot of nothing right now.
Right.
Given that, like, we haven't even finished rolling out folks with Wi-Fi 6 yet.
Right.
And now we've got something new. Like, where does this end? And, how long is it actually going to be before Wi-Fi 7 makes it to market?
Right.
Like, people are barely even adopting Wi-Fi 6 yet.
Yeah.
This is true.
Well, I was going to say, I was actually going to ask you about it as well, because I just got an email yesterday from Netgear saying that my life wasn't complete unless I upgraded everything to Wi-Fi 7 now, and they'd let me do it for like only $2,200.
Wow. How nice of them.
Wasn't that nice of them?
So sweet.
But
Larry, we had a Bluetooth low energy question from last week as we were talking about the Apple BLE spam. And
yeah,
I noticed, so I tested the attack. Like, I think you'd be proud. I built like a Raspberry Pi with, the software on it, and it sent out messages. And the world was a more annoying place for Apple iPhone users or Apple. Yeah.
So you did Apple Juice, right?
Yes, I did Apple Juice. Correct. Now, what I noticed was,
actually,
go ahead.
I actually played with a couple about a week ago as well.
Yeah. but like it'll send the messages out, but I don't get anything in return to say like it did something to the device. I'm assuming, because they'll be at least stuff way better than I do, is an understatement, but that it's like a broadcast message, right? It's just being sent out, and if the device receives,
it's like an advertisement.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it's like an advertisement. Think of it like on the Wi-Fi side with like a beacon frame. Like, hey, I'm an access point. Come connect to me. Similar type of thing. It's a beacon frame, or it's a beacon. It's an announcement saying, hey, I'm a Bluetooth device. Come connect to me. I have these features. And Apple's got all sort of their own definition for, what these features and which headphones and that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to find out when you went through Apple Juice and sent a whole bunch of the stuff, because I only got responses on my iPhone from just a couple of the messages to be sent out.
Yeah, that was my experience as well, Larry. I tested with a bunch of different devices because my family has iPads, iPhones, and then their friends bring over iPhones and iPads. And so in testing it, it was kind of like random. Like sometimes it worked and the message popped up right away. Sometimes you could lock that device and unlock it and the message would pop back up. Sometimes it wouldn't. Sometimes I had to cycle through a bunch of them before it got a message. And my only guess, Larry, was dependent on the type of message I was sending, the type of device I was sending it to, and the version of iOS that it was running, are probably all variables as to how effective the air quotes attack is, right?
Right. Yeah. So when I only had one, no, I'm sorry. There were a bunch of iOS devices nearby because I was using one of those Permissuse UD100 class 1 devices. So, 300 feet of distance for the stuff. And it was apparently only my device that was receiving the messages because no one else in the house said anything to me about weird stuff happening.
Right.
I could only get messages for headphone pairings of all the different varieties to actually work.
Yep.
And the other stuff about sharing and logging in and Apple TV and any of that stuff, nothing to anybody.
Yeah, clearly we need to do a lot more testing.
Yes.
At a sporting event. Well, maybe not.
Yes.
Maybe. We'll see. It's very annoying.
And some irony here is those same advertising messages that are used for that. There's also advertising messages with some format stuff for the Apple AirTags,
right?
As well. Yes. All that advertising stuff with special formats to talk about those AirTags and the Find My network.
More testing is needed.
Yes.
One story that also made me think of you, Larry, was coning cars for fun and non-profit was the title of the article. It's my story number 15. And basically it boils down to self-driving cars will, I believe, use camera systems. I know Tesla was very controversial switching to the camera system for self-driving and auto parking and things like that. So it knows how to identify a traffic cone. And if it sees a traffic cone, it stops. And so, and the algorithm has to be, now that I say that out loud, it has to have a few more variables in there, such as distance, the angle and proximity of the cone must come into play. But so by placing the traffic cone on the vehicle's hood in the way of the sensors and the cameras used to navigate the streets, the vehicle was rendered inoperable. I'm not sure which, if it was Cruise, Tesla, or a combination of ones. There's an activist group called Safe Street Rebel is exploiting the vulnerability by what they claim is coning. This came from Hackaday. Waymo and Cruise vehicles in San Francisco. Because I believe Waymo and Cruise both got permission to operate in some capacity in the city of San Francisco as well as other cities. But you place that traffic cone, and they show a picture of the traffic cone right on the roof of the car. And it feels like a science fiction movie where they turn the robot off and the robot just stops. There's a kill switch for the robot. And so you can trigger the kill switch just by putting the cone on there. Now, my thing was, we should equip these vehicles with something that prevents tampering when objects are placed on the vehicle, such as a flamethrower or laser beams would be my suggestions for solutions, because I think it'd be awesome. Because, of course, that would be abused. And that, I'm kidding. This would be a horrible safety thing. But I would think it would be What's the show where the robots fight each other?
Robot Wars.
Robot Wars. Except it would be real life and it would be happening in the streets all the time. Which would be amazing, but maybe not so much.
Sign me up.
That's right. Sign me up.
Yeah, Paul, I think this one is kind of crazy, and I think you're kind of right. So I kind of call a little bit of shenanigans, but then I haven't done any of the testing. But it seems strange that by putting the cone on the hood of the car causes it to stop because it sees a cone. Because that's not the only place the sensors are in those vehicles. They're not all behind the dash. There's some in the front bumper. There's some behind the front grille. There's some up near the roof line. So it seems weird that, like, I think that if the sensors were seeing it, that would have meant that they had already hit the cone and it had flown up and landed on the roof. Or on the hood, rather.
Yeah, so then it should stop. Like, after it takes out the cone, oh my God, it's on the hood of the car. I really need to stop now.
Yep. Well, so I wonder if it's more... Go ahead, Lee.
Yeah. I was going to say, if you look at the picture in the article, it looks like they're on those prototypes where everything is on the roof. Or most of the sensors are on the roof.
Yeah, it's a good observation.
Right above, the top of the cone there. So I think there might be a disproportionate amount of sensors in these particular vehicles where that cone is hitting. So I think you're right. In a production model, they'd be like surrounded with stuff for sensors. Top, bottom, middle, wherever.
Yeah, and aggregating that data, right?
Right. Just like if you have one of those parking assists where it beeps when somebody walks in front of your car, or when you get too close to the curb, right? Same idea. It would know, and it would know where it is and isn't. It's immature, I guess it's the immature technology trick, right?
Yeah, I couldn't get anyone to comment. I asked, no comment.
Yeah.
So Paul, here's the deal. Go buy a traffic cone and put it on the hood of your Tesla. Report back.
Well, except so I didn't buy the fully automated driving. We could certainly test that and see if the parking things, work or don't work, like while I was driving it kind of thing. But this is my beef with Tesla. Since they're switching that technology over, I bought the auto summon and auto park kind of feature, but it hasn't gotten fully implemented because they were re-implementing it. So it hasn't been re-downloaded to the car. So I feel like I need to get a refund for that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's weird. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me that. I need to contact them. Because I was like, I should get this in an update. And I haven't even checked to see if that has been re-enabled. That's interesting. I have to check that. Yeah, we can do some testing.
Well, there you go. Put it on the hood of your car while you do the auto summon.
Right. And see if it goes anywhere. All right. Where else do we want to go this week? Got a lot of places we could go.
You and I had some similar stories there, Paul.
We did. But one, we're talking about Wi-Fi. I did have a Wi-Fi related story in there. CISA says that Owl Labs vulnerabilities requiring close physical range exploited in attacks. Now, I think this is amazing because we've been talking collectively about how Wi-Fi and Bluetooth vulnerabilities are out there. And some of the pushback I feel like we get is, well, in order to exploit a lot of the vulnerabilities that you're talking about, you have to be in proximity to said device. I mean, Larry's been teaching this, right? So he's intimately familiar with exactly what proximity means in the context of what type of Wi-Fi and what type of Bluetooth that you have, because it does vary, and a lot of other factors come into play. But if attackers are... So if it gets added to the CISA known exploited vulnerabilities, or the KEV, that means they've observed these attacks in the wild. And so they've added a whole host of vulnerabilities with this Owl Labs. It's basically a conferencing device, not just a phone, but also a camera as Wi-Fi, and it looks like an owl. And I was like, that's really cute. But they say it's deployed to like a lot of big places that are using this particular technology, which I thought was kind of interesting, that they all have an owl in their conference room. I thought that was kind of weird. But in any case, they say they've observed these attacks in the wild. There are CVEs assigned to them. There are known vulnerabilities reported by a security research team, I believe, and we don't have any data on them. I haven't, like, what happened in these real world attacks is not being disclosed. There's probably some pretty obvious reasons why that is. There's also like conspiracy theories maybe why that hasn't been disclosed, but so these attacks are happening in the wild, which I think is awesome, by the way, because it's kind of like that I told you so kind of moment. Also, we don't necessarily think of China and Russia as being very far away and using the internet to attack us. But like, what if China and Russia were in proximity? My also thinking is something that Larry, you and I have talked about, that I, as the attacker, and this is purely speculation, I don't think I've necessarily observed this attack in the wild or heard of someone talking about it, but let's say you are in an enterprise and it's using one of these Owl Labs devices. I, as the attacker, don't necessarily have to be physically within range. I just need access to a device that isn't physically in range that can perform these attacks. So I could potentially ride off some other device that has Wi-Fi and or Bluetooth capabilities. That the second criteria is, first it has to be in range. The second criteria is has to be capable of executing these attacks. And I think that's where Larry and I have talked about this, right? To pull off some of these attacks, you need very specific hardware with very specific capabilities to launch attacks. We've talked about monitor mode, right? Permissuse mode in Wi-Fi as being one of them, right? And so that maybe isn't always the case with a device that you compromise from China or Russia, as an example, and then use as a launching pad. Larry, I don't know if you've got, or anyone else has different thoughts on this, or that kind of piggybacking attack that I described.
Yep. Yeah, no, I definitely have some thoughts about it, sort of all around. I did see a little bit of this story, and some folks kind of distilled it down for me, gave me the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah.
One of them, my understanding is the attack against the Owl Lab stuff, and I could be off base on this, but I seem to remember that the Bluetooth attack was Bluetooth Low Energy, which is often deployed without the need for a pin to connect.
Mm-hmm.
And so arguably you could connect to this device over Bluetooth Low Energy with no pin, start querying the features of the device. And my understanding was that one of the exploits was that the password was stored in one of the fields that was effectively world readable. So then you could get the password for the Owl, whether or not it was the password for a current session for a URL or something was also available, so that folks could join those sessions. That I was able to discern, but there were definitely some abilities for folks to connect Bluetooth Low Energy to get passwords for the device, basically without no authentication. So with that, you talk about proximity. And high power class 1 device for Bluetooth, including Bluetooth Low Energy, is about 300 feet. Now, the irony is that this is some of the stuff that I taught today, but if you have a class 1 device with a removable antenna and you can put a Yagi on it and make it directional, there have been documented instances of folks connecting to a class 2 device, which is your average, probably something in the Owl, from over a mile away with clear line of sight. So proximity, like even if there was something in the way, maybe you're talking a quarter of a mile. That's probably outside of the facility in the parking lot, maybe from the sidewalk, depending on where you are.
Sure. You still have to be an attacker within that proximity, or have access to a device with those capabilities. I think that's what I come down to. Like, if you look at a corporate building and within a quarter mile radius, is there a device that has a directional, antenna of some kind that has those that I can then remotely access to do that? I don't know. Maybe I get someone to drop that. There's a lot of, we could go on and kind of threat model this. I think the more elaborate our threat models get, the more the likelihood goes down that it was like remotely or whatever. It really probably just was someone in the parking lot with an antenna.
But yeah, your remote device scenario is absolutely valid. We have an entire section in the 617 course about quote bridging the air gap, and it's all about compromising a system and then living off of the land of that system to do Wi-Fi attacks. But if that device has Bluetooth Low Energy, I don't know specifically tools for that we could use to interact with that, but it probably wouldn't be too hard to figure that out.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talked about the Apple Juice attack and how it was touted as it goes on a Flipper Zero. Well, no, I mean it really needs to be on anything that has Bluetooth Low Energy chipset in it. Also, your Android phone most of them have a Bluetooth Low Energy chipset. And by the way, there's an app that can do the Apple Juice attack. You just put on an Android phone, so it can be as easy as that. And that would be an example of living off the land. Sorry, Lee, did you have comments on this one?
So a couple of things. I was going back. I know there'd been some issues with vulnerabilities in OWL, and as near as I can tell, those pretty much were wrapped up last summer, like 22.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
And I mean, it's. I've been in meetings with a meeting owl. It is kind of creepy because it follows. It swings around and points its camera eyes at whoever's talking.
Mm-hmm.
So as the conversation moves around the room, it's following you. It like says, it's cool but creepy. And they've had enhancements to help the microphone pick up for quieter voices. So that could be, hey, no more quiet conversation on the side that you can't think the mic can't hear. But my biggest concern with the meeting owl is that it's not truly asleep when there's no meeting, that it's still alive and doing stuff. And maybe between meetings, it should be in a drawer and unplugged.
Yeah. And so, Lee, to your first point, so it added to the CISA KEV in June 8th of 2022 was CVE 2022-31460, which is a Meeting Owl Pro and Whiteboard Owl hard-coded credentials vulnerability. I'm not sure if that was on the actual device or if that was Wi-Fi. But that was a 2022. And then recently on the KEV, there are on September 18th. Are you hooting like an owl, Larry?
Yes. I mean,
it hoots when you turn it on.
Appropriately so. Okay.
What are you drinking, Larry?
On September 18th, 2023, there were 4 new vulnerabilities added to the KEV, and these deal specifically, it looks like all of them with some kind of Wi-Fi or Bluetooth-related vulnerabilities. So you're right, it's not the first time an Owl Labs product has ended up in the known exploited vulnerabilities list. I don't know if that original one... I'm just curious now. So the original 2022 one says, Owl allows attackers to activate tethering mode with hard-coded hoot credentials. Did I read hoot credentials via a certain C150 value?
The hard-coded credential the password was hoot.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Hoot?
Yeah. I mean, it's cute, but not smart. I mean, it's okay. I don't blame them, but that's dumb in 2023.
Again, the most astonishing thing for me in this story is that these are Wi-Fi and Bluetooth attacks described as being actively exploited. I'd love to see like a write-up as to how that played out, who the threat actors were.
Oh, good work.
Oh, boy.
I wonder who they could be.
Who knows?
Who gives a darn?
Who says we should go to the next story? Me.
Inquiring minds who want to know.
Oh boy, Lee, you said we had some stories in common.
Why don't we go?
Go ahead.
The first one I saw. How about your number 6, for example, Fortinet?
Oh, Fortinet.
Yeah. I mean, bless their hearts, they came up with a bunch of stuff and they put out patches, which is all good. But when I was looking at it, I had seen this in the news bites, and I grabbed something John Pescatori said, which was in 21, I think it was. They did a big announcement about how they're improving because of increasing vulnerabilities. They put out a blog detailing improvements in their development and vulnerability management process. And here we are 2 years later, and we're back where we were. I mean, stand at the top of the mountain and cry you fixed everything, and then 2 years later you're back. It's not really. I wouldn't advise doing that if you didn't fix it. But,
well, I mean, did they say they were going to get better coding practices to produce less vulnerable or buggy code? And in the same breath, did they say they were going to do a better job of like finding and fixing and releasing patches? Because I hate knocking. I don't like to knock vendors, right?
No.
Fortinet has done a decent job of responding to these threats, releasing patches. Now, they did, I believe it was also Fortinet that made it harder to get some of their firmware in order to reverse engineer it. I mean, they didn't wipe it off the face of the planet, but they did like a certain firmware. You had to have a support contract and be logged in. There was some speculation whether or not you could access firmware for devices that you didn't have a support contract for. And I don't know if that was just people messing around going, no, I still have access. If I know where to look, I still have access to the firmware for that device, even though I don't have a support contract for that device, but I definitely still have access to the firmware of the devices I had. And anyway, that security by obscurity doesn't work. I'd still like to see Fortinet have a bug bounty program for their firmware, because I think that could a well-run and implemented bug bounty program could help Fortinet improve its security, in my opinion. But also, I mean, attackers are just going after these devices largely because they're internet connected, and the visibility into the attacks happening on these platforms is not great. And that's a recipe for disaster. I mean, you can take away internet access for some of these devices, maybe, but some of them, like, they have to be on the internet, right? I mean, you could restrict that. There's a lot of nuances in there, but these have to be connected to the internet and exposed to the internet as a whole, as like a SSL VPN appliance or whatever it might be. So therefore, attackers are going to go after them. We heard last week where largely it's a jumping off point for ransomware threat actors, as an example, if you're conducting a ransomware campaign. So this is going to remain a juicy target, and one that I think underscores something we've always said since the beginning of time, that attackers are going to go after these places that don't have the protections that we put on Windows servers and workstations with EDR, right? They're going to go after the places where logging isn't great and that visibility is not great, that are internet connected, and have these kind of soft, squishy vulnerabilities. I think we said last week too, the memory protection sometimes isn't great on these devices. They're using older or vulnerable Linux, open source kind of style firmware and software on these devices. And we saw I don't know if I had, VXWorks had a vulnerability as well, in the way that tar extract was a utility that had a vulnerability on it. I spared everyone from going through the version of tar extract on VXWorks that doesn't honor the relative and absolute paths, so you can clobber files and when you're unarchiving a file. So there's that. So this is where attackers are gonna go after it, because it's soft, squishy targets.
Yeah, and don't forget on the memory randomization and that type of stuff. That's under Linux. That's twofold. Not only does it have to be enabled in the kernel, the individual binaries have to be compiled with that enabled as well.
No, it's a great point, Larry.
So yeah, I mean, you could have 7 binaries on the system with it and 7 binaries without it.
Yep.
So
the interesting thing, I think your idea on a VDP for, if they don't have one, they should. I mean, these are excess, cross-site scripting things, which it's input validation, and it's It's a royal bitch to go through your code and get every single input validated, and you have to. I mean, in today's world, there's no skipping one. And maybe somebody just needs to sit there and progressively go through every field like a pen test or other type of audit, just to make a point to the developers. Learn, I'm thinking of the learning exercise, not an embarrassment exercise, so that the penny really clicks, that people really get it, that absolutely everything needs to be sanitized.
I mean, you could also go on the flip side of the bug bounty argument and go, I follow these. Larry follows these as well in our day jobs. Is the number of open source fuzzers and scanning frameworks that are out there for things like firmware. There seems to be new tools and updates all the time. I mean, also it's probably because Larry and I are tracking that stuff more and more for our day jobs, that you'll find more of something if you're looking for that thing. But I tend to find that binwalk was like the big hoopla back in the day, but now a lot of people are building things like FACT and Emba and these frameworks and a lot of different fuzzing frameworks to both emulate and fuzz the things inside of firmware. Like, I think I saw an Emba. Is it called Emba? Am I saying that right? Is that the one? Did I send that one to you? It's one. I may be getting the acronym wrong, but it's a open source framework for analyzing and fuzzing firmware.
Yeah, EMBA.
EMBA, yes. But it uses like Nicto, because a lot of the firmware has these web interfaces, and to Lee's point, like in this case of Fortinet, the latest round was cross-site scripting and things like that. My thing is, while a bug bounty program might help, but also like internally, are you fuzzing your own stuff? Like, are you building that into your process? Are you fuzzing the stuff before it goes out? Because that could help too.
So Paul, if it uses Nicto, bring it back a little bit. Do they use BittyBlah too?
Yeah, I know. Oh God. What's funny? I don't know if I want to. I'm not gonna say that, Paul. But I'll tell you after. Remind me after to tell you the thing.
So I was just thinking along the lines of, how do we make it real for people so that they prioritize that kind of checking? I mean, because if it seems all theoretical and right, you know what I mean? Just how do you make it real? That's where how do you help people learn this isn't just a theoretical anymore? That the game has changed, and it's not because you just missed it, right? It's okay.
Yeah, so decrease your chances of missing it and fuzz it on your own and have a bug bounty program. And also don't think that this is all good, because I'm writing this article in my head that I have to get down on paper. Don't think you're absolved of all this just because you're in the cloud. No. Because I think a lot of organizations, when you're using this type of technology, and I was talking with my coworkers about this, and so I'll bring this here on the show to get people's feedback, because I want people's feedback on this. You are a larger enterprise, right? I think smaller enterprises or smaller companies don't necessarily have this particular problem, but you're a larger enterprise. You've got a big box brand. I hate to pick on anyone, but we've talked about vulnerabilities with F5, Citrix, Fortinet, Cisco. You've got an investment in that technology, and then you go, I really want to move to the cloud. And am I going to go learn something new and re-architect and re-implement something completely new to do my VPN, firewall, load balancing? Or am I going to use the virtual appliance that maybe that big vendor already has in the cloud? And is that virtual appliance any more or less secure than the physical appliance? I mean, sure, there's differences there, but fundamentally, I want it to be the same, because I want to try and keep my existing architecture, skills, support contract, relationship, the whole thing. There's a business benefit to going, yeah, we use Fortinet and we're pushing to the cloud, and we can use these Fortinet virtual appliances in the cloud, and it provides great functionality for us, and we know the technology, we have a relationship with the vendor, support, the whole thing, so we should do that. That doesn't mean there's any more or less vulnerabilities. I mean, in some circumstances, I think it was Barracuda, it was like, our virtual appliances don't have this problem, but the physical ones do. I think I heard that from some Barracuda customers or Barracuda themselves, right, in their communications about it. So it's not always the case, but when we're talking about a web interface, maybe that still exists in the virtual appliance. I don't know. I'm soliciting feedback that on the whole point of are you getting rid of these vulnerabilities we're talking about in these network appliances by moving to virtual appliances in the cloud, or is it like roughly the same?
If it's the same code base, I don't think so.
And it's in the vendor's best interest for that to be the same code base.
Well, yeah.
So I can tell you, working for product companies, right? A horrible thing is I gotta write a version of the product for the cloud. I gotta write a version of the product for on-prem. Like a lot of product companies are in that boat today. When I talk with people, like, no one's alone in this particular scenario. Right. You got customers that want to be all in the cloud, and you got customers that want to be all on premise, and on premises is a better way of saying that. And so you want it to be the same. It's your point, Lee.
Yeah. One thing the cloud does is it gives you additional controls. I mean, everything's software defined, right? And it's a smaller scope. So it's easier to wall off, one or two hosts or something really sensitive, whereas you don't have the grumpy network team telling you what an evil CIDR block you're now creating, right? So it's easier to do the right thing in some cases. And that's the advantage of the cloud. It doesn't make it more secure. It just means you have easier options to access to options to make it secure. You have to know to do it, but if you can win. And of course, it's the seeds to its own destruction, because you can make it so secure it doesn't work.
Yes, it's always the case.
And I had some friends telling me about how a friend of mine went to a company and they have containers running in data centers around the world, different cloud providers. And as part of going there, he's been there almost 2 years now, converted everything to infrastructure as code. So he's got the same container Docker files, the same Terraform files on everything, right? Says absolutely, so he can tweak the security and deploy it out around the world in like 15 minutes if he wants.
You can also mess it up really fast too. That's what I found in doing that style of DevOps, whether it's infrastructure as code.
He told me the importance of, I think it's called Terraform Preview or something like. Basically, he says, "Here's what I'm going to change. Are you sure?"
Yes, and there are whole companies. Said, in fact, we worked with one. I think I don't remember the name of which. I get them confused, but yes, there were companies, Lee, that I remember speaking with that were like, you can send us all your Terraform scripts and we'll kind of scan those and threat model them and build the environment, telling you about the problems before you put it out in production. That's absolutely a thing. And that's a glorious place to be.
I'm just saying that's one of the things that cloud really enables. And that's what we've culturally got to learn how to do it. I mean, I'm not going to paint it as trivial just because my buddy did it quick. He's always been incredibly smart and fast. That's not all of us, but hey, it can be done.
Yep. Do we have another story in common? Let's see.
I was trying to think.
We got to talk about Microsoft.
Yeah. The 38 terabyte one?
I can't. Well, this one kind of leads into it, right? Is on one hand, and I think I was saying this before the show, before you guys joined, was that we love to hate Microsoft. I don't think we really hate like all of Microsoft. No. Microsoft is such a big company, over 200,000 employees, most lines of code, I think, out of any software company, I'd argue. A lot of different products, divisions, the whole thing. I think we hate sometimes the decisions that Microsoft makes, whereas other times they're doing really good stuff. I mean, does that mean Microsoft as a whole is totally, completely evil? I don't believe that. I mean, Microsoft does great things. They make Edge for Linux. That's a really cool thing. They, the Defender infrastructure is actually really good. They make some really good security products, but I mean, they also make Teams. So I mean, there's that. So I mean, again, I think we're not hating Microsoft as a whole. We're not loving Microsoft as a whole. They're so big that we're kind of picking and choosing when we like something that Microsoft has done or is doing, and when we disagree. Where I like what Microsoft is doing is contributing back to the security community. My story number 2, they discovered flaws in Ncurses, and we'll somewhat like spare the audience. You can go read the article I linked to, is Microsoft's original research team write-up of called Uncursing the Ncurses, Memory Corruption Vulnerabilities Found in a Library. So they found vulnerabilities in the Ncurses library. Has to do with the implementation of Ncurses, which creates the command line GUI that we all know and sometimes love on various different devices, right? And so this library is an open source library. Then you've seen it on Linux, BSD, Mac OS. My question is, what was Microsoft doing looking at it? I think the answer to that is irrelevant. The fact they did look at it and disclose the vulnerability in a responsible manner and work with all parties involved. They worked with Apple on this, which was what? That's
for crying out loud. Talk about the twain shall never meet. That's awesome.
Yeah. So
cats and dogs down together and
exactly.
Yeah.
They were holding hands,
sleeping together,
singing Kumbaya. But the other point is this vulnerability ends up in a lot of things, and now I believe it's limited to local attacks. I didn't see any like remote code execution. This looks more like local attacks to me. But so many of these appliances, devices, IoT stuff runs Linux, has Ncurses, because I've personally seen it a number of different times, more times than I can count, even on just small Linux kind of, or open source based appliances. So a little background on Endcarses, right? They discovered vulnerabilities, which provides APIs to support, they call it a TUI, text-based user interface is the term that I was looking for. It was released in 1993. It's commonly used by various programs on POSIX operating systems. That was the term I was looking for. Linux, Mac OS, FreeBSD. Using environment variable poisoning, attackers could chain vulnerabilities together to elevate privileges and run code on the targeted program's context or perform other malicious actions. So they worked with the Ncurses maintainer. And I think that's where it comes down. It might have been in this show or Open Source Security Podcast, or maybe in another show as well, where we have these very mission critical open source libraries and or projects and or utilities that are maintained by one person. I think curl was one of the examples we're using that. I was like, no, it's kind of like it'll be like a whole team. It's really like, no, it's like one person. And I think it was also an open source security podcast where it's like the code for NTP is maintained by like one person. Like,
and like that guy is looking for disciples and can't find anybody that wants to take it over. And like he's ready to retire. He's like in his 70s.
And they do it as a labor of love. Like, this really interests me. But then everyone just leans on that person to maintain it that whole time. And to Larry's point, like, eventually they want to move on. Nathan was just saying in the previous segment how us in security, we have a way shorter attention span than that. Like, we do a talk, we release a GitHub repo to go along with the talk, and then after the talk, we're on to the next thing, man. And we never come back to that and realize other people are using it and going, where are all the updates? We're like, I did 3 more things after that. Anyway, we have a shorter attention span. So Thomas E. Dickey, thank you for maintaining Ncurses and working with Microsoft on this. So they worked with Apple. They worked with a random Twitter user who wrote a fuzzer that like uncovered different attack paths, and they integrated that fuzzer into the vulnerability reporting. Gurgely Kalman, it was the Twitter user's name that they recognized in this post. So, I mean, not only did Microsoft do great research, work with all the people, they recognized all the people in this post and ultimately helped the internet be a safer place with these Ncurses vulnerabilities, which I thought was really awesome. Like, go Microsoft. Like, the Microsoft. All right, so who's the Microsoft folks? Because I skipped through all the press coverage of this. If you want a complete history of environment variable poisoning, if you're interested in that kind of thing, they've got 6 different references to other types of environment variable poisoning. which I totally flagged, and I'm going to go back and read because it sounds really interesting. And then the references list is a mile long. And who do they say? Jonathan Barr-Orr, Emmanuel Okozie, and Michael Peirce are the researchers credit. Microsoft Threat Intelligence Team. Good job, folks. Awesome work.
Hey, Paul, I want to jump back a little bit to some of the stuff you were saying about loving and or hating Microsoft.
Yes.
Yeah. There's So last week, in part, all of the craziness. One of the things that happened last week was I did a webcast with Microsoft. Was that the last week or the week before? Either way, I did a webcast with Microsoft, some folks from Microsoft, about supply chain security. And they are unbelievably committed to supply chain security to the point that they developed a framework for going around the circle about supply chain security and making sure that you have a risk and you have some inventory, and then you are addressing those, and you're continuing to do that in iterated fashion. And they released the framework open source to the community. And we were getting some of the facts, from the Microsoft folks, and it's along the lines of they generate somewhere on the order, if I remember correctly, 100,000 software bill of materials every day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's insane.
That is crazy.
Yeah, just the sheer size, scope, and scale of the software that's created from Microsoft is just astonishing. And to think we pick on them when they have a vulnerability. Well, it's not so much that they have a vulnerability. Sometimes we pick on them more so because of the handling of that vulnerability or recognition of that vulnerability. But I thought Jared DeMott, when he came on the show a couple of weeks ago, did a great job of going like, hey, look, like sometimes we get it wrong. Like you got to you call him a little bit of slack for that, right?
Yeah.
Or teams. But
they're not sitting idly by and not trying to raise the bar. They're jumping in with both feet. They're clearly committed to helping raise the bar, even if they make the occasional goof. They're not
right.
They're not stopping. They're picking themselves up, dusting themselves off, and heading down the path again.
I think they raised the bar with the largest data leakage. Maybe that's the wrong raising of the bar, though.
I read that one and I said, "Oh crap! I could have done something like that."
Yeah, no one's perfect, but how did they leak? I saw this and I didn't really dig deep into it because I kind of went to the Ncurses kind of Microsoft news, but so AI researchers inadvertently exposed 38 terabytes of private data while publishing open source training data in GitHub. Nathan was actually just talking about how it's hard for these AI and specifically LLM models to decouple data in code because it's kind of all intertwined together. That sounds like was part of the reason here.
See, the way I figured it, I was looking at it, they said it was an overly permissive shared access signature, which is used for cross-access across Azure items. And it looked to me like the old trick of you had this tree of data, which had a bunch of stuff in it, including some backups, some passwords in various trees, and they were wanting most of it to be in the LLM, but not all of it. And somebody just got lazy or mistakenly didn't look close enough and said, look, from here down, share it all, it's fine. And it wasn't fine. That's why I said I could see myself doing that. It's like it'd be easier than creating N access lists, right? Or N SharePoints, whatever, however you want to call it. The work to carve out the stuff that shouldn't have been shared was probably huge. But it turned out to be really a very visible mistake. That's one of the ones you hope you can get there fast enough and not be caught. But I suspect that's where that LLM training itself, it went to town. It probably consumed that whole data set in minutes.
So the leak included a disk backup of 2 employees' workstations. And that backup included secrets, private keys, passwords, and over 30,000 internal Microsoft Teams messages. Which actually goes back to a story we covered a while back about Teams logging being overly promiscuous about what it logs and stores in its logs.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's nice to have the ability to turn up the logging level, but you hope for a little more sane default. Because there are times you need it to figure out when something's going wrong, but most of the time you don't. But man, like I said, I did a face palm when I read this because I was like, oh crap, when's the last time I did that? Not at that scale, never at that scale, but still, I can appreciate it. And then getting it, out in the news. Oh my God.
Yeah, it looks like though in the disclosure timeline, they knew about this for a while and had been revoking a lot of those tokens before they made the public disclosure. Yeah.
They tried to fix it, but I mean, the only thing worse would have been some sort of video with whoever did it saying, "I did this and I will never do it again." Right?
Yeah, this was found by the Wiz security team. So,
yeah, but still, it'll be interesting. That's two of our other overlaps. Did you cover the MFA story?
I heard about the MFA story. I didn't particularly cover that one. This is when what happened. I think you briefly described this earlier to me, Lee.
Yeah. So basically, Retool was using Google Authenticator with the OTP apps, and a user there's an option in Google Authenticator to store your seeds in your Google account. And basically what happened is somebody managed to figure out somebody's Google account and get the rest of the seeds. And so they had social engineered some access to the company. They got those seeds and they just kept going because they had, all of them. The point I took out of this is that, look, a lot of the OTP apps will let you, synchronize to a service. Authy, Microsoft Authenticator, and Google Authenticator all have the ability to store stuff, but it's only going to be as good as where it's stored. There's an interesting twist in Microsoft Authenticator, at least on the iPhone. It will only store it to a non-work Microsoft account.
Mm-hmm.
For better or for worse, you have to use a personal account. But the point, I just think about it. Before you do that, make sure you understand where it's storing it. It's a bugger and a half to redo all your OTP apps. Better yet, get away from software. Use hardware tokens. YubiKey for the win, right?
Yeah, I find YubiKey to be somewhat of a pain in the butt.
Yeah,
sorry, I'm tangled. My cord
and
is
for
tangled.
a while there, Paul, you were all about the YubiKey and gotta have my YubiKey, and I can remember a number of times I can't log into my podcast machine because the YubiKey's in my office. Hold on a minute.
Yeah, it was just a pain in the butt. So I did switch to the to an authenticator app, but also I find that the password vaults will ask you to sync to your authenticator, so it can just do the multi-factor for it. And I don't trust that. I don't do that. It's probably fine, but I don't do that. It probably depends on which one service you're using and how you configure it. So,
I've got a couple of them here. And these aren't the ones that are inserted either. I've been doing some testing, so I have a bunch of them right now. But because there is one with NFC which will work with a mobile, as well as one that's got the Lightning and USB-C interface on it, which is kind of fun on a phone. But if the multi-factor is too difficult, people will work around it, and that's no good either.
Correct.
You don't want people solving you as a problem. But I said so. I'm liking it, but there are some constraints. Reduce the number. You don't want it set to have to touch it every time you want to say log in or put in your password. That's really annoying. Might be fine for FIDO2 use, but for regular stuff, for example, I use mine for encryption and signing certs. If I had to touch it every time I was doing the pin for the cert, I'd be fairly pissed off. But most of the point, know where you're storing the things. Where are you backing it up?
Yeah,
Right.
can I just say that it's like, just remind everyone that it's really important to probably physically write down your seed phrases. As last year, I got my phone stole out of my pocket, and it just happened to be in between an update of my photographs. And I ended up losing a small bit of cryptocurrency because the photos weren't updated to the cloud, and I'd screenshot it, my seed phrase. So because I'd lost my authenticator as well, I couldn't get back on to the where I'd stored my cryptocurrency.
Ouch.
Yeah, lucky it wasn't too much.
Yep.
Yeah, that sucks. You want to talk about pretty infected Android TV devices or really esoteric, nerdy Ubuntu thing, or compliance? I have to say the compliance one is actually pretty interesting.
Compliance.
Larry, are you on mute or?
Yeah, I was on mute. Sorry. There were ants crawling on my leftovers.
Oh,
Classy hotel.
mhm.
We won't say which one.
Classic hotel.
Yeah, classy. But I say Android and then go to the compliance one.
So this one keeps coming up, which I think is really interesting. How this one keeps coming, because it keeps coming up from the same source, and the same source is.
When I saw this, I'm like, this looks really familiar.
Yeah, and that's really why I wanted to talk about it, because I think it's interesting how it keeps coming back around, and it comes back around because, and I didn't realize this is how it's being described. Dr. Web was also the outlet that broke this story when we covered it, I don't know, over a year ago. And Dr. Web is described as a Russian IT security solutions vendor. It's kind of interesting. And they seem to publish a story where they detect, so the headline is, millions of cheap Android TV boxes come pre-infected with botnet malware. Larry's yawning already. As we covered this, like, yes, if you go buy the cheap knockoff Android TV stuff that's likely coming out of China, the article describes it actually, it's using the open source version of Android. You can put whatever you want on there when you're making this device, which speaks to the supply chain. And this comes down to you. You buy it because a brand new, how was I looking at it? Did an advertisement show me an NVIDIA Shield when I was reading this article? It might have. And I was like, oh, well, how much does a Shield TV cost? And so there's two new models from what I can gather, newer models anyway. One looks like a cigar tube, and it's $200, and that's a Shield TV. And the other one's a Shield TV Pro, and that's $250 or $300, and that's got some more horsepower, more RAM and storage. And so I'm like, well, that's kind of pricey. If you're paying somewhere between $200 and whatever for your TV, and you don't want to use the crap that's installed with your TV, which is a whole other conundrum and a whole other story. That could be why your TVs aren't as expensive, because you're using that stuff and they're collecting data about you. Because you can't buy just the TV today. Like, I just want to buy a monitor, but I want it to be a TV, and you can't. Like, all TVs are smart today. You can't buy a dumb TV. I guess you could buy a monitor, but that would be probably really expensive. And it must have been the Open Source Security Podcast. I think it was Josh Bresch was talking about how you can buy a TV that's not smart, that's made for commercial purposes, and it's made to be like on all the time, and they're like super expensive, but you don't get the smart part. Yeah. So, or you can go buy the NVIDIA Shield, which is pretty expensive. So on top of the cost of your TV, you're adding $200 to $300 for another device that comes from NVIDIA. Now you can play games on it. It's got some extra features. I bought them when they weren't quite as expensive. The older models, I feel like, weren't that expensive. Or you can buy the cheap knockoff. If you search for, I'm sure if you went to Amazon and just searched for Android TV, you'd find a whole bunch of crap. And this crap, so ONN Android TV 4K UHD streaming device with voice, remote control Google Assistant, and a high-speed HDMI cable, $32.
And the sad part is, like, that's about the same price I just paid for an Amazon Fire Stick 4K.
Right, because
Like-
Amazon is probably losing money, or breaking even on those devices because they're collecting your data. Could be one. Are they probably collecting your data? They're monetizing it in some other way. They're keeping you in the Amazon ecosystem as another, vote for giving you that or selling you that device for a low cost.
Right.
You're also help training their natural language processing if it has the Alexa. Everything Amazon sells, right, has the Alexa functionality built in, whether you choose to enable it or not. So there's that.
How can listeners at home mitigate against this? If you've bought the low-level Android device off Amazon or whatever, or would you say to buy a firewall or something like that? How are they going to mitigate against becoming part of a botnet?
Yeah, I mean it's hard because it needs access to the internet to stream stuff. I mean you could try limiting, but that's a game of whack-a-mole for sure. I don't know. What does the article say to do? It says not to pirate content.
Right. Don't double your luck by using pirated content and pirated services. That's part of it. But if the device itself is jacked up out the gate, you're kind of screwed. I mean, that's the advantage of even the Android, the Fire TV stick. It's at least got Amazon stuff on it, not some other crap.
Yeah, well, that's where I got the NVIDIA Shield. It's right at the end of this article. So the article from Tom's Guide recommends that you throw out your crappy devices. Aaron, that's its recommendation.
Okay. We just threw it in the bin.
Throw them away. It says if you're using a third-party device to pirate content, you will very likely want to toss it out for something that's more secure or, like not pirate content. There's that.
Yeah.
I mean, you can pirate content with any of these devices if you try hard enough, right? And that's where I saw that the recommendation at the bottom of the article is check out NVIDIA Shield TV or NVIDIA Shield TV Pro. I was like, I haven't looked at those in a while, so I looked, and yeah. So I guess I don't know, but now I want to go buy the $32 device and I want to reverse engineer it and I want to see what I can find on it.
Yep. Throw it in a nice instrumented network and see where it talks to.
Yeah, or use the that would be a good use case for Packet Squirrel. Packet Squirrel would be a good thing, right? Isn't it? That sits in line and grabs the traffic, right?
Yeah,
that's exactly where I was about to go. What can you put in line?
You could throw Reet on it and listen to the beaconing.
You could see if it's beaconing, yeah. Or you could look at the Android, pull the files off of it, pull the firmware or Android off of it, and start looking at it.
I'm thinking, how deep could we get into those? Could we feed it a certificate so I could man in the middle even the encrypted connections?
Yeah, I mean when you have physical access to it, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is it. So this $32 device has 978 ratings on Amazon and a 4.5 out of 5. How many of these reviews are fake?
Yeah. How many of those reviews are the same person?
Yes. Craziness. Yeah. So other than for security research purposes, Aaron, I wouldn't recommend the $32 Amazon device.
Okay. I'll throw them all away then.
Is that what you have at home? Now he's like, now he's admitting he has those. Those are the ones you use at home, isn't it?
I'm not admitting to anything. Statute of limitations and all that.
That's right.
Bin it, Aaron. Bin it.
Well,
now Larry suggested now we talk about compliance. And And unfortunately, Jeff isn't here.
Jeff, I was about to say, where's Jeff? We need Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff is overseas in Canada this week.
That's right. Where's Jeff when you need him? Overseas.
Jeff's on the talk on Slack, so he's probably listening to us. We could probably reverb in Jeff's comments as we talk about it, sort of at a lower level.
Let's see how much we can not mention PCI just to grind Jeff's gears.
All right.
We also have to not mention
story.
Oh, so my story number 19. Feds hit Penn State University with false claims lawsuit over cyber compliance.
Oh, did I put that story in too? Because I was.
Did you? Yeah, did you read this one?
That's totally a compliance story.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have anything to do with PCI. It has everything to do with 800.171 and
Correct.
CUI.
Correct. Which, I mean, I like better than PCI, Jeff. But
I actually do a lot of work with 171.
171's amazing.
It's pretty robust.
Yeah.
But here's where we're going.
Pretty lightweight too.
But here's where why I like this story, because I think it underscores the point of, I think if you're going to do business with or doing business with the U.S. federal government, I mean, other countries may have similar things, but I'll mention 171. So, doing business with the U.S. federal government in some capacity, you are going to be held to a security compliance standard, I think, more and more stringently as time goes on. We've kind of seen this trend. We've seen CMMC. I'm told going to start having more teeth. If you want to be hold data and do business with the federal government, you're going to have to adhere and prove adherence, and that takes many different shapes and forms depending on which standards and what kind of data you're holding and what kind of business you're doing with the federal government. But you're going to have to prove that you're maybe not secure, but compliant, right? And prove that you've done something to meet that compliance. What you can't do about it as much anymore, and this kind of speaks to that trend, is lie about it. And that kind of seems, at least the claims, right? This is being settled in court, but this seems like these are the claims against Penn State University. So the article made it sound like this Decker character was the whistleblower.
Yes.
And he claims that after finishing his role, he discovered missing records for certain university projects in the Registration Supplier Performance Risk System, a database used to monitor contractor performance around acquisitions and procurement. Under the order from said, simply uploaded. So what they told him to do was upload template documents to solve the missing records problem. I kind of read into that, and the article made similar claims or assessments of this situation, that basically what that means is you were tracking your compliance to various things and noticed that you hadn't provided evidence that you were compliant to this certain thing. So you uploaded like something that said you were compliant without actually doing any kind of assessment, without actually asking people like, hey, are we doing this? And are we doing this? Procurement. Hey, when we buy this, do we make sure that it has or doesn't have this? Yes or no? Then based on that, maybe there was a survey component, right, to the compliances, an audit, I should say. And then uploading those audit results to say, hey, we did this audit. These are the results of the audit. Rather than do that, they just said, oh, yeah, like we have this template, and we just throw it up there and says, yes, we did all those things, when you really didn't check to see that you were doing those things. They also said that they allegedly moved its cloud services from Box, which was a FedRAMP certified service, and to Microsoft 365 OneDrive, which was not certified. And perhaps didn't tell anyone, like, oh, yes, we're compliant. We're using Box. But then on the back end, switched it out using something different that's not compliant. And again, these are just alleged claims. I'm not saying Penn State is actually guilty of this. This is just what I read on the internet. We all know, what you read on the internet is true 100% of the time, of course. But these are all what's being alleged of Penn State. So, but I think this is a trend of, especially with federal government, you're going to have to do these things. You can't just lie about it.
Well, I completely agree with you, because some of the really large defense companies that I've worked with, they buy the by the binary number
Yes.
really follow the 171. But I can imagine a lot of the lower contractors, this is just a tick in the box, and they've been getting away with it for years.
Well, yeah, and other folks have told me stories like, oh, I was working on a large contractor, and they're like, oh, we need to do an audit, and we need to meet with your accounting team, and we need to see 3 years worth of records and all of your processes and procedures for that. And it's like one independent contractor, and they're like, I don't have an accounting team. Like, I'm an independent contractor. We're like, what do you mean you need to see the process and procedures? So you're right, Aaron. They definitely do in certain circumstances anyway. Take compliance very seriously.
Well, and I'm looking at, so where I'm working, we use federal systems, so we're following 853. So you're talking 600-700 controls per system that you're implementing. And I'm looking at this; it looks like it's not even 100 controls. I mean, what the hell?
No, it's like 140 or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that hard, and it actually looks like it's actually pretty damn easy to read what's required. You don't have to read between the lines. Unlike good old 53, where sometimes you need to, look at it twice and sideways. It's gotten better, by the way. I started working
I think
with
on top of the 171, which is maybe more difficult to achieve, is the CMMC, and if you need level 3 above level 2, that makes a whole new world of hurt for organizations that aren't as mature.
Yeah, that definitely would make it harder. So I was a little wondering about the FedRAMP thing, because technically, to get a FedRAMP access to a FedRAMP system to do the FedRAMP authorization, you have to have an email address that ends in .gov. Penn State doesn't end in .gov. So I'm trying to figure out how they got the box one to begin with, because that's part of the FedRAMP rules, unless they got somebody to sponsor them.
Oh, it could be. Could be. I'm not sure how that.
And of course, there's state ramp, which is for states. But yeah,
the end of the article I thought was really interesting too. So Brian Boynton, who then acting Assistant Attorney General, said the department has tapped the Civil Division's fraud section to lead efforts and will partner with Inspector General across different agencies. So Brian states that. And I like his statements because it backs up what I'm saying. So he says, we recognize that most companies and people who do business with the government abide by contract terms and obligations.
Yeah.
Back to Aaron's point and Lee's points as well. He also says, we recognize that cyber incidents and breaches may result even when a contractor has robust monitoring, detection, and reporting system. Fair point. Compliance doesn't equal security. Neither does having robust monitoring, right? Whatever that means. But when contractors or grantees knowingly fail to implement and follow required cybersecurity requirements or misrepresent their compliance with those requirements, False Claims Act enforcement is an important part of the federal response. That means that there's going to be a stick to this, right? Which is
a big one.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and that they're stick. I mean, I'm wondering, if they got grants based on this work, they might have to give the money back.
Correct. Yeah, I think I've seen situations like that, or at least heard concerns that in a grant situation you got to give the money back.
Yeah, and for whatever reason, you're making me think of my story number 10. Which I put in there as just a cool reference. DOE is distributing $39 million among 9 projects to work on more secure or retrofitting security in energy systems. The reason I linked them together is one of the participating parties in that is one Penn State.
Oh, interesting.
They did a proposal that got funded, and I'm pretty sure the DOE IG is going to probably go knock on their door about the security, because of the other article.
Yeah, I mean, Penn State's huge, so they likely have multiple grant-funded things, happening and going on. But you're right, Lee, that could cause extra scrutiny to further underscore the point that you need to pay attention to these things.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think it's really cool that Penn State got involved. These are like $3 to $5 million projects that are being awarded. So this go a long way in a research project, particularly done at a university where the overhead's lower. So I'm hoping that all just gets worked out. They learn their lesson, because I'd love to see these projects get successful. Although that one project that went to Berkeley that involves Hawaiian Electric, I think somebody's got a boondoggle there going out to Hawaii to work on it. But hey, it works. Sure. So, like I said, the main, I just thought really cool. These projects are doing AI, ML, IPv6, and they're trying to layer them on top of what exists to try and just raise the bar with what's in place, because, critical infrastructure, bugger and a half to replace, but can we do something over what's in place? To me, a good approach for it, whether we're acronym compliant or not. I'm separating the good deed from the overuse of terms, because if it works, it works. I guess we've all heard those terms misused too many times to not be a little bit cynical, right?
Right. I like a good detective story, and I think a lot of us. It's interesting. My son said to me the other day, he's like, "Dad, you're like really good at like detective work, right?" And he kind of almost said that tongue in cheek too, because he can't get away with anything. Because I'm always like, it's time for an investigation as to validating all of your claims. And him being a teenager, he's like, oh, shit. Why does Dad have to be so good
Let me just go give you my phone now, Dad.
Right, yes. Just, turn it in, fess up now. Spare me the effort. But he also understands that I like doing this. And I think most of us in security, all of us in security, I think kind of have that. We like a good investigation. We like to go find the truth. Find it's like a puzzle. It's like a puzzle. It's exactly what it is, Larry. It's a puzzle. So SANS Internet Storm Center posted this a little while ago on September 5th. Common username submitted to honeypots. It's my guess. So they are still maintaining the D-Shield honeypot system. And different points across the internet, right? They're collecting data about what people are doing, and malicious attackers are doing as well. One thing they're doing is tracking logins. What are people, if they hang something out there via SSH, let's say, what usernames and or passwords are people using to try and log in with? And then they can aggregate that data, which they did, and come up with the most common usernames and or they also have one that does passwords as well. So the number one, 48%, and I'm not sure what the time frame is on this data set, but 48% of the usernames were root, right? Then so that's the largest percent, and then it starts dropping off from there. The admin, user, test, Ubuntu, and then 345 GS 566 2D34 has 36,473 attempts. Well, that's kind of what is that? And the username only had one password associated with it. 345 GS 566 2D34, also the password. So they basically asked for comment. Since someone posts on Robert Daniel Picard on Mastodon says, asked the question, could 345 GS 566 2D34 be something like a radioactive dye to see how a bot master's network is being seen from open security honeypots? Like the string is random enough that it's easy to identify in published data sets and feeds, so someone running a bot network could get a sense of how their activity is being tracked. I like Robert's theory. I think we lack evidence to support his theory. I would like to see an attacker leak some code or their own data leak and see that in there, maybe with some chat logs to back up their attempt could be the evidence that we need to back that up. But I think it's a great theory. It's kind of the attackers keeping tabs on us security folks, right?
I'd also love to see question One, I wonder if the automation tool that is being used to try to log into all of these places with those credentials, I wonder if like it read from some other part of code that wasn't actually meant to be set to that variable. And that variable got set as username and password and is being passed as part of that. Like maybe
what if it's on purpose? What if I put a tool out there and I said, hey, you give me a set of usernames and passwords and I'll brute force it. But inside the code, I'm like, I'm also going to try this thing so I can see where my tool is being used.
Yep. I mean, also like maybe off by one, like if we remember back to some of the earlier Windows days, you could definitely tell when there was a Windows XP prior to Service Pack 2 system probing for networks, because it would go through the preferred network list of Linksys, Netgear,
right,
Hilton Honors, then a really long hex string, because they did the counting wrong, and then the last count was to read the next one in the string, which really wasn't there, which was some random piece of memory. So they were leaking memory out of probe requests.
Oh, yeah. I remember
similar. Maybe something similar.
Yeah, that could be.
Alternatively, I'd really be curious as to what happens if a couple of folks tuned their honeypots to actually have a user of that and the password. And then what?
Ooh.
Yes. Oh, I hope they do that. They should do that and get back to us. That would be great.
Yeah. D-Shield, get on it.
Yep. I think we know some people.
Yep.
I thought that was really cool. Great theories too, Larry. I love it.
Yeah. It's interesting that weird username is also attempted as a password on a lot of those other accounts.
Yeah, it's interesting they just made it the same.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a password on some of the other accounts too?
Or it's attempted.
Yeah.
Or something very close to it.
Oh, yeah. No, I see that in there now.
It's like, it must be, on some encoding, it must be something common. I mean, there was a speculation in the original article you linked that it was on a Taiwanese keyboard, it was my password, and then somebody said, no, that ain't it at all. But I'm thinking it's got to be some pattern that if we saw where it came from, we'd be like, oh, wow, of course. But it's kind of interesting. Definitely would be a red flag to watch for.
Yeah. I just think interesting detective story. Hopefully we
hell yeah.
get to the bottom of it at some point.
You know, did we want to talk about any of Aaron's stories?
Yes, I did.
No, now you put me on the spot. Thanks, Lee.
Oh, we got. I want to talk about.
Love you too, buddy.
MGM and Caesars.
Oh yeah, we have to talk about that.
What's the latest? The latest happening there.
Yeah,
I think what I was swinging towards this is that just the fact of the SEC regulations and the fact that Caesars and MGM Resorts reports were quite different, as in I think it was Caesars was full of information and MGM's wasn't, and then Caesars reported within 7 days, but then MGM reported in 4 days. So it's like there's loads of opinions on this. Is like the test case to see what the SEC regulations will shake out.
Yeah.
Isn't Caesar? But Caesars is owned by Harris. What is Caesars owned by? It's not just Caesars, right? I feel like they're owned by.
I think it's Harris.
I think it's Harris, right? When I initially saw it, I thought it was owned by MGM. I'm like, no, it wasn't MGM. It was Harris, right?
I think so.
So does that mean that the IT company was working across both?
No. Not sure. No, MGM and Harris are separate entities.
Right. Well, because the 8K filing says Caesars Entertainment Incorporated.
Oh, interesting.
I was going to look up the other one.
It was MGM Resorts, I think.
Yeah, MGM Resorts International.
So I think Paul, did we cover that? I wasn't here last week. Did we cover those stories last week at all?
Lightly. I want to say they were still breaking, maybe, when we went into the show. We had it was like breaking like right around that time, and I just had what people were posting on social media, which I don't know, in our case, probably pretty accurate considering who we follow on social media, right? We follow all of our friends and cohorts in cybersecurity and on social media, so
just to rib at Larry a little. Just to rib at Larry a little bit, who's obviously teaching a SANS course. SANS was actually training in Vegas at the time that this happened, obviously unconnected.
Yep. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yep. Yeah, network security 2023 was actually happening right towards the tail. It was right towards the tail end of the conference when it happened, and there was lots of lively discussion in the the SANS Slack channels about it.
Oh, bad.
Like how many of the SANS instructors are going to head over there and offer consulting services?
Right.
We do a little ambulance staging.
It sounded really bad. I think we talked about last week the number of things that were reported as being affected on MGM properties in any case. I think I talked about it was like everything from the parking lot to
everything.
ATMs, like everything seemed interconnected and or was hit in like with seemingly one fell swoop.
There's been reports that they were losing $48 million a day, but then there was also reports that possibly a ransom of $15 million was paid.
Mm.
Yep. My understanding that was confirmed by the SEC reports that Caesars Palace paid $15 million in ransom.
Which was half the demand, if I recall. They wanted 30.
Why are these SEC reports getting leaked, or are they? Because surely
they're public.
They should be secret, right?
Right.
I think they were be a matter of public record.
Yeah.
But then you don't want to disclose what the vulnerabilities were, because until you patch them, there's still going to be vulnerabilities, right? Especially if you've reported it after 4 days.
Yeah. I don't think it's been. I think some of these regulations and requirements are being developed. I think we may have talked about that too. Breach disclosure. In a timely fashion, reporting that there was a breach and perhaps some of the impact, but I don't think anyone from a regulatory standpoint is asking the victim of the breach to say exactly how it happened, in what time frame, because of course you may not know. I mean, historically, we don't know for sometimes a pretty long time after all the forensics are done exactly how it happened, right? Like that period of time from knowing there's a breach to knowing what happened to describe like, hey, how they get in and what they did once they got in is dependent on the breach, but it's sometimes pretty lengthy. But in this case, there's a lot of speculation that it was social engineering and what have we. We tend to get the same story, but I don't know what's been officially. It's tough to say what's officially reported and what we're kind of hearing is hearsay. How much of that is true? It's tough to tell.
Well, there were some interesting side effects from this that Sam was telling us about. From being in the area where the casino was effectively empty because so many things wouldn't work, to handwriting transactions, which would probably play right in our missing PCI partners' hands.
Yes.
To handing out free booze in the check-in line because it was taking hours to check in. All of which probably cost them a bloody fortune, probably way more than we expect.
Mm. Yeah, the cost. Yeah, you're right. And everything you described, the costs just keep going up for this breach.
And then, if this is an issue with the investors, they'll have some issues, some blowback there too. So, boy, oh boy.
Yeah, that's a bad one.
Yep. Yeah, it reminds me of the time. You remember that time at DEF CON when they routed all of the internet traffic from DEF CON through somebody else and then back to DEF CON?
I do. I remember that.
to manipulate routing tables. Yeah, I mean, I may or may not have done some work for some casino groups, and neither one of these two, for the record, back in the day. And we had access to a Cisco border router with default credentials. And as a result, we had a Cisco whiz on our team. And for that one site that we were testing that we had that access, we were able to route all of their traffic back to headquarters through my basement first. Oops.
Oops.
And for the record, I do remember getting on a call with the customer, telling them how screwed up their stuff was and that all of their traffic was being routed through my basement while getting in the car to come to the podcast that night.
It's awesome. It's awesome. I don't know if you guys saw this one, but Chromebooks will now receive 10 years of automatic security updates. It was interesting to something in here about like when that clock starts ticking. What did it say?
7 years before they're manufactured. That's when it starts.
Yeah, right.
I feel like that should just be normal.
Well, I mean, put that in the context of other, like if you look at Microsoft and Intel that participate in the supply chain to deliver you your Dell, HP, Lenovo laptop, right? To have that long of support requires collaboration across the entire supply chain, which is, if you heard my presentations or someone I say in the show, right, is very complex. It involves a lot of different manufacturers, hardware, software, and firmware. So that could be difficult. Whereas the Chromebook ecosystem, while vast, is smaller than the Microsoft Intel ecosystem, right? So I think that Google is in a better position to say, yes, you're going to get 10 years worth of security updates. And what they said in the article that speaks to how they have a little more control over the supply chain is that Chromebooks get automatic updates every 4 weeks. They're extending it to 10 years. And they say a platform is a series of components that are designed to work together. Something a manufacturer selects for any given Chromebook. To ensure compatibility with our updates, we work with all the component manufacturers within a platform for things like processor and Wi-Fi to develop and test the software on every single Chromebook. And they can do that more easily and end up with a much longer lifespan because it's a much tighter, it's a tighter ecosystem than some other ecosystems. Now, what's interesting is Apple has a much smaller ecosystem and control over hardware, software, and firmware, yet I feel like they don't support things for 10 years. It's much, much less time that they support things because they want people to buy new Apple products more and more over.
Well, how far back was the iPhone 8? Because your current software will run on it. So that's
I guess more so 7? On the Mac OS side, Lee, not so much on the phone side.
Yeah, and now that we're running Apple Silicon, I suspect that the life cycle will be longer because it's their chip.
But they still don't want you. I hope so. I mean, I would love for Apple to come out and say, hey, on your M1 or M2, you're going to get operating system and security updates and firmware security updates for 10 years. That would be awesome. I don't think they're going to do that, though. I mean, historically, they haven't.
It's like Apple only do about 3 years, right? About 3 releases. Is that correct?
Yeah, then they want you to buy a new one.
Yeah, or sometimes more. But the cool thing on the Chromebook front is, during the pandemic, how many schools bought how many million Chromebooks? And I was thinking here they can only last a couple of years, but hell, if they can get 10 years out of them, that'd be great. I mean,
it's huge in education. Now they talk about that.
Yeah.
I thought I swapped out the link to the article that I had in there. Google made a post on this that is like, it's like towards the end of the article, Senior Director of Engineering for Chrome OS and the link is in the word said, Google is also working on blah, blah, blah. That link is the link to Google that gives a much better description, much better information. This is straight from Google. And they talk about how Chromebooks are the number one device used in K through 12 education globally, according to FutureSource. They're a sustainable choice with the recycled materials that reduce environmental impact and repair programs that help them last longer. I'm kind of all, I'm all for this. I'm in this camp of use it longer. I mean, I'm sitting here in front of my framework laptop, which is also a testament to that. And look, no computer manufacturer absolves itself of like being absolutely good for the environment. I mean, ultimately, there's going to be e-waste no matter what you do. But I also saw a thing, and I didn't put a link to it. But in along these lines of extending the life, in the framework laptop, you can swap out your main board. And your main board is like this one component that comes out that has your CPU, RAM, and storage on it. Someone took that, like 3D printed a case, and made like a Nintendo Switch Steam Deck out of the main board from a framework laptop, which is awesome. Because then you can go buy the upgraded one for your Framebook. So you can get a faster laptop, take your old components out, and make a portable handheld gaming device. Now, cost-wise, I don't know what that does, but certainly when we talk about recycling and good for the environment, like that's pretty cool. I guess, I don't know. My grandfather grew up in the Depression, right? And kind of instilled in me, like, don't waste stuff. So Larry loves that. Larry, you find a usage for every old piece of computing in your environment. Maybe not every, some of it sits on a shelf, but certainly you do a lot of recycling of your electronics. By recycling, I mean you reuse, right?
Yep, I certainly try, and yeah, there are definitely some things like, I got to hold on to that so I can reuse parts or recycle some of that stuff into something else. And sometimes life gets in the way, and I don't get to those projects, and it ends up at the electronics recycler after a while.
It does. Yeah, I'm in the same boat.
How many RCA cables have you still got, Larry?
Actually, just a couple. I think maybe 2 or 3. Of the sort of the 3 grouped variety with the yellow for the video and the red and the white for left and right audio. I think I probably only got about 2 of those left.
And as soon as you throw out those last 2, you're going to need it.
Yeah,
of course. I'm going to have to go to Amazon and buy one. Exactly.
It's always the way.
Yeah, I try and, reuse stuff when I can, but it turns out up here, the local electronics recycler actually works with schools and other things to take the stuff that's turned in there and have it get reused, extending its life, which makes me feel really good about recycling stuff there. And they even have an option to do a DoD wipe on the hard drive if I don't have time, which is like, no way. Yeah, we do it. It's okay. So, hey, at least I found somebody to do it for me and recycle it properly.
I hang on to certain things, and one of the projects that I have on my list, speaking of projects you want to get to, is Collie Net Hunter on your older phones. And I've saved many of my Pixel phones because I just didn't want to part with them. Largely, I was also like being a paranoid security person, so I'm like, I'll just keep them. I'll keep them, locked in my office, and that's safer than maybe trying to resell them, where someone could potentially recover my data. But Collie Net Hunter is supported on most of those devices, like a really cool project. And I haven't gotten around to taking the time to go. I gotta go just do this kind of thing. So. And of course, Raspberry Pis, it doesn't matter what version they are, you keep all of them and you try and find uses for. It's like awesome. Like the apple juice, I was like, I got a Raspberry Pi. Like, hell yeah, I'm going to put Collie on that because that's what the apple juice author says that they used as a test. They're like, oh, I did this with a Raspberry Pi and Collie. I'm like, I'm going to use that because that means when I go put their, clone their GitHub repo and try and make it work, they made it work on Collie, so I increased my chances, right? I try and use whatever the maintainer or project author is using to do that. And sometimes it means you keep a little extra gear. So just a tip for you all. And I hope to do more segments on, again, those things. I need some more tinkering time.
I've got some friends who have Christmas lighting displays where they're controlled by Raspberry Pis. And they're really cool. In fact, when I do my virtual Santa, I have a projector and a video, but it wouldn't. I'd have to tell it every time what video to play. So I just got a Raspberry Pi and have it auto start the video and just hook it up to the HDMI input, and I'm on my way. And it just sits there and runs in the garage, no problem.
One of the first things that when I got into Raspberry Pis that I got involved in was something we were talking about earlier when we were talking about the Wi-Fi, and that was trying to find a way to hack unattributed, obviously just to sort of proof of concept it, but that was having a Raspberry Pi with an appropriate antenna on it and a cellular phone, and then put that next to a building or a company that had unfettered Wi-Fi access with no password, and then you could cellular into their Wi-Fi and then not be attributed for your proof of concept hacking.
I also I needed to talk about this other thing too. I found an ESP32 dongle that replaces all of your keyboards on Tindy. And it's this.
Which one is that?
So it's I'll put it in Slack. When I tell people about this, they get really excited. Well, nerds like us get really excited. And so this was part of my project that I talked about last week. That Sid Larry would be really proud. So I got the Raspberry Pi, and now I'm just filling in between stories. I'm going to move to one or two more stories before we close out. But so I got the Raspberry Pi, put Collie on it, put apple juice on it, right? And I was kind of like, I want to make this portable, so I got a battery pack, and I got what is the Bluetooth one in the apple juice GitHub repository? Larry, he had that Zexmite ZEXMTE Bluetooth.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So I bought one of those. It works really well.
But now, what did you use it? You use it on the Pi, right?
I used it on the Pi. Yeah.
Okay. Because I've got that one and also a very similar model that is pretty darn sexy. But I've been trying to get it to work under Ubuntu 2004 and 2204, and I've been having a hard time getting it to work.
Yeah, so I used Collie on the Raspberry Pi ZEXMTE. How do you pronounce that? It was on Amazon for $18.99. I'll put a link to that. Hopefully we can get these links if I think of it, I'll put these in the show notes.
Now, is that the single antenna one or is it the dual antenna one?
It is dual antenna. So it says USB Bluetooth adapter, 5.1 long range, 5.1 blah 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 blah. It's basically a bunch of blah 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 in the description.
Yeah, so there's another one that is by the same company, same chipset, that has a single antenna.
I see that they get so mine's the Z01. They've got a BT505, BT506, and a DG69.
Yeah. So there is a single antenna one, and it is removable antenna.
Yes.
Which is great because you can add your own, and it is also a class 1 device, so the highest output power. And part of the reason I want to get that working is we talk about doing that in 617, and we use the Pirani Sena UD100 for that because it's class 1, has a removable antenna, but it's about $150.
What? The single one here. So the ZT, one of the ones the one I just clicked on, I don't know what the model number is $1259 on Amazon.
Exactly. Exactly.
This says 328 feet or 100 meter Bluetooth dongle 5.1.
How do you utilize your phone for this then, Paul?
Oh,
is that just download an app?
Yeah. So you battery power the Raspberry Pi, you put one of these Bluetooth adapters on it, And the way that I did it before I get to the phone was I did the pins on the Raspberry Pi header. There's 3 pins. I Googled it. Larry probably knows on the top of his head, but there's 3 pins that you connect that go to a USB cable, and that's your serial UART connection to your Raspberry Pi. So I connected it to my laptop, and in Collie or Raspbian, if you go into your config.txt, it's like UART underscore enable or enable underscore UART equals 1 will enable that console. So I didn't have to configure Ethernet or Wi-Fi to get it on any kind of network. I was just directly consoled into my Pi, and that's how I was able to get a terminal, to get a console session on it and execute the commands to issue attacks, right? So then it was like, well, how do I do it from my phone? I don't know how I stumbled across this, but I found this person on Tindy that for $19, and I haven't tested this yet, but for $19 sells an ESP32 dongle that replaces the keyboard. So you plug this USB dongle that has an ESP32, I wish it's in the other room, an ESP32 chipset on it, and you use an app, and you can get a keyboard connection to it. So I was like, well, if I put the Raspberry, so my thinking is I haven't tested this yet, but so I battery power my Raspberry Pi with the external Bluetooth adapter on it. I plug this Bluetooth dongle into it. Like I stick that in my pocket or in my backpack or whatever, and hang the antenna out. And then from my phone, I can run commands on it. This isn't anything terribly new. Like I think it's cool stuff. Larry, I think we were doing similar kind of stuff with like Nokia N900s or whatever back in the day, right?
Yep.
So can I just drop rubber ducky type scripts down on this then?
For rubber ducky stuff, you would target another computer with rubber ducky type stuff. And for that, I built one as purely an academic exercise on a Pi Zero. Like you take a Pi Zero, I think I documented it. That's in my notes, Aaron, to do as like a tech segment coming up. And again, that's nothing new, but like it's something I think a lot of pen testers have in their arsenal. Like, yes, you can go to Hack5 and buy it, and that's totally fine. Like that stuff works and it's great. But it's much cheaper. You buy like I think it's $8 for a Pi Zero, Larry, and you put the ducky script on it. I did it not that long ago. I have one. It's in my box in the other room.
Yep. And Aaron, to your point, yes, I also believe that you can use the ESP32 chipset because I think it can do USB HID mode as well over the USB port. So yeah, I think I would be surprised if there isn't a port for the ESP32 for ducky for turning it into a rubber ducky.
All fun stuff.
That's fun.
Yeah, it's neat stuff.
Yeah, somebody's probably yelling at me about that in Discord right now, but I don't have Discord open to save bandwidth.
You can catch up on it.
Yeah. So where was I going? So many things now running through my brain as we're talking about all that kind of fun stuff. Oh, Apple Juice also someone ported it to the ESP32 platform.
Of course they did.
Right? Because an ESP32 also has it has, depending on which one, has Bluetooth as well.
Yep.
Yeah. So they ported to so that's Apple Juice supports that. I haven't tested that one yet, but I want to. Really esoteric, nerdy thing that I intend to torture you all with is my story number 11.
Let's do it.
Hey, I gotta go. We'll see you later.
Just like really quick.
Stay right there, mister.
If you're doing the unattended subiquity installs for Ubuntu, there was a version that was released that didn't apply the security updates from security.ubuntu.com. It was pulling the repo for the security updates from mirrors, and that's bad because they could lag behind. Apparently, this was a big deal. So, but they've released an update for Subiquity that patches it so it uses security.ubuntu.com, which is kept more up to date. So if you're doing unattended Ubuntu installs with Subiquity, and you've done that already, yes, you should update, but that means all subsequent installs of Ubuntu using the unattended installer Subiquity will be okay. But if you've done ones where it was vulnerable and pointing to a mirror for your security updates and not security.ubuntu.com, you need to go edit your apt sources.list file and switch that to security.ubuntu.com. That is my really esoteric, like oddly specific vulnerability of the week, which I thought was awesome. Like, I kind of can't wait to talk about this because it's just so oddly specific, right?
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. And while we're on the topic of Linux, there was a pretty cool article, my story number 21. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Is it João Carreira? Joao. He works for a company called TuxCare. This was a weird scenario. Like, I feel like I need to give this person props because I also found they do I independently found this article, and then I independently found that there's a Linux enterprise Linux security podcast, and this is this guy's one of the hosts. This is just way too strange. I don't know what happened, but I found this article and their podcast in the same browsing session, but completely mutually exclusive of each other. In any case, is that how you say it? Is it Joao? It can't be. That doesn't. Joao. Someone help me pronounce that. Okay.
Sorry.
Mr. Carrera of TuxCare says, you need to change the way that you patch. If you struggle to patch your systems because of the disruption it causes, then you need to look for different ways to do that. That is the absolute bare minimum basic you could do to improve security. So just patch it, right? And what he's talking about is really, that came through in this article is we can't patch like 20 years ago. We have to patch with the technology that we have today. Kernel updates that don't require reboots, that kind of stuff, snapshots, containerized systems. We have all that technology today. If we're not using it, we're doing ourselves a huge disservice, was essentially the gist of it. And what you don't patch is where attackers are going to come through. Really just kind of breaking it down in a very basic thing. If you don't patch it, that's where attackers are going to go after. But then they kind of front-ended the article, probably where I should have started, but as Linux being the more appealing target. They say due to the computing platform's potentially high return on their investment, prevailing security countermeasures predominantly cater to Windows-based threats, often leaving Linux, particularly in private cloud deployments, perilously vulnerable to a barrage of ransomware assaults. I think it just underscores the importance of patching and securing Linux, which is often kind of left by the wayside. And I keep seeing articles like this with evidence week after week going, Linux is being targeted more and more. And largely, I like the notion that much of the focus on security is about Windows. When we talk to pen testers, they talk about pwning Active Directory. When we look at the latest security defensive technologies, they're addressing Windows-based threats. And we don't have as much of, I think, of that innovation and focus on Linux. So that was my story number 21.
In a world where we have a finite amount of coders and the big prize is probably going to be a pull of sort of Microsoft type stuff, how many people are actually working towards badness in Linux? No, it's yes, we should patch, but it's is it more important than patching your PC?
I think the trend that I'm seeing is pointing towards more badness being targeted at Linux, Aaron, right? And I think
it's is Russia putting time into hacking Linux? Is there enough Department of Defense users in Linux that Russia, China, North Korea, Iran care about this?
Yeah, I think we're seeing the APT, air quotes, APT, ransomware groups going after these software targets. I think it's, and I don't have any hard evidence off the top of my head, but less and less the opportunistic mining cryptocurrency, crypto kind of stealing stuff that's happening on Linux, morphing into jumping off points for ransomware kind of style attacks, right? Network appliances devices being one class. People going, oh, I don't have Linux in my environment. I'm like, do you have a deployment on EC2? Yes. Like what's? Oh, we're using Amazon Linux. Oh yeah, we do have Linux, right? So because it's not getting that necessarily visibility in many organizations, it's a softer target that folks are starting to go after.
What's he actually telling us in this article? Is he just telling us to patch it? Is he telling us how to patch it?
Yeah, well, he works for a company called TuxCare, which does patching for Linux. So I think it, it's
okay. Buy our product.
Yeah, it behooves him to talk about that. But I mean, also it's something you should do. Again, because I think we're seeing the stats I'm seeing is upticks in Linux malware, which is really just oftentimes living off the land, right? Trend Micro, actually, I should have put that article in there, but Trend Micro just did some dissection of some Linux-based malware as well. So,
to be honest, when I start working with a new company, one of the first things I ever talk about is aggressive patching. So I'm with him, however you pronounce his name. Good bloke.
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, he points out that, it's the environment. It's that we've got, these aren't desktops. These are servers running enterprise application pieces, and they're not patched, but every 6 or 8 weeks, because of the role they play, they want to leave them alone. And I suspect there's some category where people don't patch them at all because reasons. But you got to be on notice that that's a different platform. And by the way, there are EDR products that actually work on Linux that they're probably not deployed in a lot of areas too.
No, I agree. I think the number of people that are deploying something like Sysmon for Linux is really low, but it's there as an option.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a horrible option either. Because
it's complicated and requires work.
Right? But we can't just start putting all our eggs in the Microsoft basket and that's what we're going to protect, right? We got to protect all the things. And I think attackers, more and more, the trend I'm seeing is that more and more attackers are starting to pay more attention to Linux. And it's becoming more prevalent. And in areas where it's outside of that, in the same realm of firmware, right? Like it's in the kind of fringes of like, it's just outside of my realm of what I'm perceiving and paying attention to, not high on my priority list. All these other things are taking priority. And so I'm not patching my VoIP phones. I'm not patching my network devices and appliances. I'm not patching my Linux, virtual instances, because other things are taking priority. And now I think we've reached this tipping point where attackers are going, oh, that's interesting. You're not really paying much attention to any of that Linux stuff. So therefore, that's where I'm going to go attack, because attackers are going to go after the places where they can hide more easily. And I think there's a huge, under the microscope is Windows-based systems and applications, but not so much on the Linux stuff.
Well, think about this. Haven't we just seen, a lot of those IoT attacks, they're basically Linux systems. So there's a huge repertoire of malware that's being developed that'll do that you could easily port to enterprise Linux. Because none of us write anything from scratch anymore. Go ahead.
Or the other way around.
What was that, Larry?
Or the other way around, port the enterprise stuff to IoT.
Right. Because it needs to be a small little device.
Yep.
I would like to talk about my story number 4, if that's okay.
Yes, please do.
It's like we talk about this a lot across the shows about sort of medical devices, and we've talked about it on PSW, Security Weekly News, that I've been on, and it's just really interesting that the US Food and Drug Administration can now reject devices not meeting cybersecurity criteria. And this is happening as of the 1st of October 2023. So, like, in about 10 days or so. And medical devices with known vulnerabilities or lacking security designs will not be permitted for sale in the US. And if I go right to the bottom of my notes, it says in 2022, the FBI identified cybersecurity vulnerabilities in over half of the internet-connected medical devices in hospitals, which I think this is just like super, super big, that it could come to the point where they stop selling certain medical devices. So it's like, new requirements for approval. Manufacturers need to guarantee regular security updates and patches, submission of a software bill of materials that details all software components, including commercial, open source, and off the shelf.
Larry's giggity. He was like giggity when you said that, because that's what he does in his day job a lot.
Yeah, it's like, okay, Larry, do you want to just dive into this and take it away from me? Sounds good. Go, Larry. Go.
No, I want you to keep going, and I'll comment afterwards and give you some more.
And then can we take 3 minutes after Larry does that and just talk about Kia Boys, because it ties into the story, and I want to run this analogy by you. So go ahead.
Okay, so a post-approval plan must be submitted to continually monitor and address potential cybersecurity issues with the device. It says that devices found vulnerable after approval can now potentially be removed from the market. There is a bit of criteria for a cyber device. It says it must be internet connectable, must contain software, should have technology susceptible to cybersecurity threats, and devices without internet connectivity, like aircraft devices in hospitals, are exempt, but consumer health gadgets like smartwatches are not. Go, Larry, go.
All right. So, yeah, I've spent probably the last 4 months looking at the omnibus bill, specifically 524B, which actually gives now the FDA some power, some actual teeth to do some enforcement for secure medical devices. And as part of the submission for new devices being submitted to the FDA for approval for use with humans for medical capacity, they've now got this whole host of paperwork that they need to provide, including a threat model, a pen test, results of a pen test, software bill of materials, a vulnerability risk assessment plan, the ability to provide ongoing maintenance and firmware updates, being able to note that there are potentially new risks found, and the ability to provide patches. And they need to be able to demonstrate all of these things to the FDA at time of submission. And if they can't, the FDA can issue what's known as an RTA, or a refuse to accept. So effectively, with the refuse to accept, like, you screwed something up, you didn't prove to us that you have a security commitment moving forward with this device for the next period of time. So now you need to go rethink this, and you might go back to the back of the line now, which, if you don't get this right the first time, could mean you're at the back of the line, and that may add, we're theorizing that could add up to a year now of development time, because you've got to go back and you've got to resubmit, and then you've got to wait. And for like a smaller device manufacturer for medical stuff, like, if you have to wait another year to get your device to market, it will be the death knell.
Right.
What I'm really worried about is this, that in the article it says devices found vulnerable after approval can now potentially be removed from the market. So this could be some sort of life-saving equipment that's sort of maybe market leading, and they're just like, yeah, turn it off.
Yeah, and I think which
I kind of weird, because as part of the new submission process, they've got to submit a plan for how they're going to provide patches and updates, and be informed of new vulnerabilities that may infect or affect those devices. So I feel that's kind of strange that, like, they're going to have that action after the fact when they should already have it done and be able to resolve those issues because they made that commitment up front.
But what if the vulnerability is in the hardware and the only way to fix it is new hardware? Because that's different. That's different from the software, right? And the analogy I've been using is the Kia boys, right? So I've been practicing distilling this down in like 3 minutes or less. Hyundai makes the decision in 2015 to remove the immobilizer from vehicles, right? First mistake they made. Immobilizer means my key fob has a chip in it, car has a chip in it. Those chips have to talk to each other before the car can be started, regardless of the mechanism that starts the car. So without the immobilizer, it means you can hotwire the vehicle. That was the whole purpose of the immobilizer, was we don't want to let people hotwire a vehicle. The second mistake that Hyundai makes in vehicles from 2015 to 2021, no immobilizer, but also taking apart the steering column, any USB cable can be used to then turn the starting mechanism and start the car. So I don't even, as an attacker, I don't need that knowledge of even knowing how to hotwire it. It turns out you can actually hotwire it too. If you know how to hotwire it, you can hotwire it because it doesn't have an immobilizer. But if you don't know that, you could be a 15-year-old that watched a TikTok video and go, oh, I can take apart a steering column after I smash the window and I can start a Kia, right? So the result of that in the US is pretty catastrophic. I mean, 5 people died. The 600% increase in stolen vehicles that fall into this category that don't have an immobilizer and can be started with a USB cable. So 2 vulnerabilities introduced by Hyundai. Where I get to the analogy of FDA and regulations, which I've reached this point in my life where I feel like regulations can really help us, is Canada doesn't have this problem. You know why Canada doesn't have this problem? Because they passed regulations that say you can't sell a vehicle in Canada that doesn't have an immobilizer. Now, in the U.S., we're looking to maybe potentially pass legislation like that, I hope, but it's too late. You've already sold, I don't know how many vehicles, right, in that state where it's vulnerable. So now there's Hyundai settled a $200 million lawsuit. State Farm won't insure Hyundai or Kia vehicles that have this vulnerability in certain cities because there's such a high risk. People I know that work in insurance are like, yeah, they're like, how come it's so expensive? People come to me want to insure a Kia, and they're like, it's like insanely expensive. I'm like, haven't you heard of the Kia boys? And they're like, no, what's that? I'm like, you should Google search it and read the articles. I'm like, that's why the insurance on those vehicles has gone up because of those 2 problems. However, had we gotten ahead of it, like we're doing with the FDA, like Canada did with vehicles sold, we can get ahead of this problem so we don't have those problems, so stuff can't be shipped with those vulnerabilities and cause all of these problems. And the FDA is the same thing. I mean, it's still loss of life, right? I mean, I'm surprised that only 5 people have died in the Kia, because if you watch the videos with what they call Kia boys, you can go on with the story. Like, yes, they're stealing cars. They're making videos of them. They're creating rap music. If you search on any music platform for Kia boys, you'll find all of these rap songs because they're playing the rap songs that they made while they steal the vehicle. And to become a Kia boy, all you have to do is film yourself stealing a Kia, and instantly you're a Kia boy. And then if you really want to be like a super Kia boy, you can have your own rap song, Aaron, have your own rap song. And
there's actually a possibility here, Paul, because I did an article on Friday on Security Weekly News where Kia was one of the car manufacturers that actually collected, excuse me if I get this wrong, but your sexual activity within the car.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Very interesting. So, yeah, but that's my analogy of what largely Larry and I do, right, in protecting systems, is getting ahead of it with regulation so that when you purchase these devices, when they're introduced to market, there's a certain bar for security that speaks to a minimum safety standard. And whether that's a vehicle, whether it's a medical device, whether it's a PC from Dell, HP, or Lenovo, there's a minimum safety standard for these things. Really helps when it comes to security, so that we're not covering your heinous vulnerabilities on this show anymore, and people aren't getting hurt, and machines aren't getting popped because of these vulnerabilities. No, that's my analogy. I don't know how it holds up.
Baselines are good. We like baselines.
It's a fun story to tell. It gets people's attention. But
Yeah.
Sorry, I was slightly distracted because we had an issue with one of our systems. The CPU was over temperature and it rebooted. I think we lost Lee.
No, I came back.
Oh, you're back, Lee. So Lee, I mean, this for me, it ties back to compliance and minimum standard. There's a minimum standard that you need to meet to do business with the federal government, right? And it's the same thing as a minimum standard for vehicle security that you have to provide to sell a vehicle in Canada. But those same standards, not so much in the U.S. I think it really, God, I hate to say it speaks of regulations and compliance and standards really helping the security problem. Good Lord.
It's not very hacker of you, Paul.
No, it's not, right? It feels very grown up of me, and it's terrible.
It's because of your new beard. You need to go back to the goatee.
We'll see.
I'm sorry. I don't actually mean that. I love the beard.
I won't. I'm not going to trim the beard. If anyone asks me to trim the beard, I'll say Aaron says I should keep the beard.
Definitely keep the beard
because I get all behind compliance and regulation when I have the beard.
Next thing you know, he'll be making a. Oh man, when I was a kid, things were this way.
That's right.
But no, that's what we have Jeff for.
Didn't I? Wasn't there some similar story? You mentioned the Kia with the minimum security not meeting. Wasn't there also like a certain brand of car you couldn't buy, like in Massachusetts, the 23 version, but you had to buy the 22 or earlier version of the car because the 23 didn't meet there
today as well.
Yeah, I'm blanking on it, but yeah.
Yeah, I seen a meme. I said down with the kids. I seen a meme about it today, and totally with you, but don't remember the details. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting. Right. It does. The Kia thing still is a persistent problem even today, right? I mean, that stuff is still happening, and if you're listening, I think it's an interesting story. I mean, you should go look at some YouTube. I watched a couple of YouTube videos, and there's one where the guy interviews the kids in Milwaukee that are doing the thefts, and in the background while he's interviewing them, someone has stolen a Kia and is driving erratically in the background. There's another one where the dude actually does hotwire it to prove that you can't hotwire it, and then even blurs out some of the taking apart of the steering column. But we could probably figure that out, even though they're blurring it out, kind of thing. So I think it's kind of interesting.
Did Paul or anyone, do you know what the percentage of listeners are actually in the UK?
Last I checked, it was pretty high. It was up there. It was, obviously US is number one. UK was up there. Australia is up there. Germany, we're big in Germany. We're like at one time when I looked at the stats, Aaron, we were like the David Hasselhoff of podcast. Huge in Germany. Germany.
Did you listen to the show on Friday? Mm-hmm. I sang a David Hasselhoff song, Jump in My Car, on Friday on Security Weekly News.
That's awesome.
Yeah, don't listen to Security Weekly News when I'm on. Things like that happen.
Now I want to. Now I'm going to have to listen to it with my kids in the car. They're like, why are you listening to this?
I have a very, very, very quick UK-related story that's actually worldwide.
All right, last relatable. One. Aaron, take us out with this story.
In the same way that GDPR affected the whole world, the UK Parliament is pushing through at the minute something called the Online Safety Bill. And that's a mandate to tech companies to scan all users for specific content, even if their communications are end-to-end encrypted. What this actually says it means is like the UK government's like, oh yeah, we're giving strong assurances to upholding user privacy. But what it actually is saying is that for government use, for mandated government use, through the regulator Ofcom, is that things like WhatsApp that use end-to-end encryption might have to put in backdoors. They're also on about content censorship, where they're going to, under a banner of content deemed inappropriate for children, needs to be removed. There's going to be age verification systems leading to adults losing the rights to private anonymous speech. And it's kind of kicking off a big stink over here. And actual companies have gone on record, like WhatsApp, that said we might just pull out of the UK.
Oh, yeah, that's unfortunate.
Age gating. Show your ID to get online. Is that what I'm catching?
Yeah. And backdoors in the end-to-end encryption.
Yeah. No, I've heard about that. I've heard about that stuff going on in the UK. Now that you say that, it's a double-edged sword. Yes,
right? It sounds a bit Russian and Chinese and Iranian to me.
Well, I mean, that's the thing for next. We haven't talked about how encryption helps, but also helps criminals, right? That's and that's what interesting that we talked about how regulation can help. This is an area where regulation can be really bad, right? Best intentions, we want to catch pedophiles. Great intentions, but has privacy ramifications for people who aren't criminals. And so that's the balance that we have in regulation. So I'm glad you brought that up, Aaron, because it's a good contrast, right, to what we're talking about, to the positive effects of regulation. So I want to thank everyone for listening and watching this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Over and out for life.
Over and out.